Thank you all for joining us, and we're excited to do this particular version of Maine Challenge. So this is the second session of the 130th legislative session, so it's supposed to be the emergency session. And it was characterized by a number of things. The most important one, and the one that affected everything, was COVID. So I think last year we thought that would be our only COVID session, but it turns out this was a COVID session as well. And until the very end of the session, we were not in person. Things were done, via Zoom mostly, and that was really difficult. But so there were some unprecedented things. The budget has passed, and there were amazing things in that budget. Some things, the 2 years of free college for community college is a big thing. There are $850 checks that are going to get mailed to everybody in June. I'd love to hear your comments on what you think about that particular initiative. Roads and bridges, funding for mental health. There's a lot of stuff that was in that budget. But we really want to talk about some specific areas, as I said. And one of the first ones is tribal sovereignty. In 2015, tribal sovereignty, the Penobscot and Nation walked out as tribal representatives because the relationship between the state and the tribes had deteriorated so. This year we saw a massive shift. And so I want to just show a little bit of the drumming. There was a rally there yesterday in celebration of this. And then we also have some bills that we're going to talk about. But this was yesterday at the State House. Some incredible drumming right between the buildings that took place. It was incredibly powerful and moving. There you see Rena Newell, who was the Passamaquoddy representative, and there she is right there. And she was the driver of most of the legislation that we saw. One of the great legislative champions for tribal sovereignty is Representative Ben Collings from Portland, who has been involved in this issue for over 25 years. So I'm with Representative Ben Collings, from Portland, who has been an incredible ally to and an incredible worker for many years with our native tribes here in Maine within the Wabanaki Alliance. So this year, lots of successes through the legislature so far. Do you want to talk about what that's been like for you?
I remember about 20 plus years ago, I was a legislative aide here, and there was really not much support at all for tribes. People didn't even know where the tribes were, a lot of people in the legislature, and anything to really enhance their sovereignty was met with complete rejection. The fact that we've come to the point where people are standing up, state leaders are standing up and wanting to acknowledge past wrongs, rectify them. I've been very pleased by that. And so potentially the Land Claims Act, potentially safe drinking water for the Passamaquoddies, yes, and potentially some tax and gaming advantages. Tell me the difference it's made to have so much support from allies on the outside, because there was over 2,000 pieces of testimony in favor of changing the land claims. Has that made a big difference in here? Yes, overwhelming. I don't recall too many issues that I've been in the legislature here for 6 years and before, being a staff member and having other roles in the building, where you had so many thousands of people behind one initiative, where you had hundreds of organizations all across the state, all uniting, and not partisan at all, but just about the rights of self-determination of Indigenous people, which here with the state of Maine has had, for the most part, an adversarial relationship with tribes, and they've kind of gotten in their way and prevented them from exercising sovereignty in a manner that you find consistent in most other states. Yeah. So yeah, that's big, very big change. So yeah, the support and that momentum, because before bills were introduced about changes to the Implementing Act and more about sovereignty and economics of tribes, there was a movement around the state where around Indigenous Day or around offensive racist mascots, town by town, momentum was building and people were speaking out about that. And then when you saw the Standing Rock movement with the Lakota about access to clean water and that sort of environmental racism, that really spread throughout the country and had some impact on the activism here. And so there was, from the ground, you could feel this momentum. And as we got one bill passed, on Indigenous Peoples Day, or getting rid of mascots, or the Violence Against Women Act being applicable to tribes, being able to take care of that themselves and stop outsiders coming in and abusing women and children. All of those things just built more and more momentum, and you could just, people around the state, you could just, in a matter of years, you just saw it go like to the point where, you know, such a great majority of people, without even blinking or thinking, like, oh yeah, we're going to do this. Everyone wants this.
Absolutely.
Like, who doesn't want this? You know.
Absolutely.
So yeah, very big.
It's been a big change and a big evolution.
For sure.
And hopefully opening lots of doors.
Yeah. I think it's a good start. A lot more to do, but I think we've built a foundation that we can continue to build on, and I think it's gonna be. I feel positive about it.
Basically, I think there was a seismic shift in how the legislature dealt with the tribes this year. There's the Indian Land Claims Bill, there's a Passamaquoddy Safe Water Drinking, and then a governor's bill around gaming and taxes. And all of those have made it through the legislature. They're sitting on the desk of the governor right now. We don't know what she's going to do. But regardless of what happens, there has never been so much, as you probably didn't hear it, but there was over 2,000 pieces of testimony submitted on the tribal sovereignty issues. So just wondering if anybody has any questions or any thoughts about that before we sort of do the next little recap. And again, we'll come back to these and open them up, but it's been an amazing. Oh, Allison said she just signed the drinking water one. Thank you, Allison. That's great. It's unbelievable that for decades there has not been safe drinking water on the Passamaquoddy reservation, and those kids have, you know, not safe to drink or shower in or anything. So this is a huge step forward. So that's a wonderful thing. And so can she let it come law without her signature? So yes, she can. 10 days after the legislature adjourns sine die, she can let it become law without her signature. The thing that she can't do at the end of a second session that you can do in the first one is you can't pocket veto. That is, she can't just hold it and then it doesn't become law, because now it will become law in 10 days if she doesn't sign it. So everyone is very anxiously awaiting what she's going to do particularly with the Indian land claims, which was a 3-year process. And again, thousands of pieces of testimony. I'm sure many of you on this call, on this Zoom, were ones who submitted that. So again, the difference, and at the rally yesterday that you saw pictured, it was amazing to hear what it meant to the tribes to have such incredible allies who were spending their time and effort. And everywhere we went, when I ran for governor in 2018, the only issue that came up at every single forum was tribal sovereignty. So it's a big issue. And so I want to just pivot now for a minute to another big issue, which is housing. And I know that Frank O'Hara, head of the Housing Commission, is watching this Zoom. And housing is a crisis, from people who are unhoused and homeless to people who can't find rental properties, to people who are unable to buy affordable housing. It is huge. And so there was a very, very big push this year to do something about housing. Brian, can you run the housing clip with Representative Victoria Morales, who is one of our housing champions?
And we are very happy to catch up with Representative Morales, who we interviewed earlier for Maine Challenge, about the housing crisis and the challenges that we have. So here we are, not too much time left in the session. How did we do?
The biggest piece that we did was we passed LD 2003, which will establish for us in every municipality throughout the state where projects can be built, where housing can be built, working specifically with local communities, providing them with the tools that they need to change their ordinances and kind of do everything they need to do to make their communities housing ready. It's a really big step that we made there.
That's awesome.
We're also allowing property owners to use their properties in ways that they see that they can contribute to the housing crisis. If they need to house a family member, an elderly parent, we're allowing folks to use their properties in this way.
That's awesome.
Yes.
And what about like putting shovels in the ground? Were we able to get any funding to do some of that work?
Yes, so in the whole biennium,
we
have $50 million that came from ARPA funding.
Okay.
And then we were able to renegotiate about $38 million in our bonds that Maine Housing undertook. So all of that money is going to constructing new projects, and we have, I believe the number is 26 projects underway.
Great.
Which is actually really big for our
That's
state.
huge,
We have 26 projects underway. Typically, we only build about 250 units a year. That will really get us to about 600, maybe 700. And again, our goal is 1,000 units a year to meet the need.
Awesome. So good start. We got to commit and keep going.
That's right.
All right. Well, thank you so much for all your help and your leadership on this.
Awesome. So questions about housing. You know, one of the things that was really interesting is that the housing question really bifurcates to affordable housing, and then there's a whole other piece about housing for people who are unhoused or homeless, and then all the issues, substance use disorder and mental health, that there's a whole need for supportive housing where people have housing with supportive services. And so that got less attention, I think, this time than this big bill of Representative Fecto's, or Speaker Fecto's, that Victoria worked on, which is really about zoning and really making sure that our zoning was not prohibitive, that towns weren't prohibiting the capacity of people, individuals, as well as developers to be able to do affordable housing. So again, I think there was some progress made. I think housing advocates, both for unhoused folks and for people who wanted affordable housing and more units, are feeling a little bit frustrated that there wasn't more done. But it's clearly an issue that is one that's going to stay with us, and we need a lot of help, I think, as we go. So, Frank O'Hara, as you're listening, it's time for the Housing Authority to get going. But it's again, it was one of the big accomplishments that happened this year. Some good news. So, I'm going to pivot now for a second to one of my passions. If you watch this show at all, you know that community mental health is an issue that I have been an advocate for many, many years. And this year with COVID, the issues of mental health were exacerbated, and the community mental health system, we got to see how shredded it was, and that showed up in our emergency rooms and in our jails and with our police departments, and people who just couldn't get services.
This is Senator Kathy Breen, who has been chair of the Appropriations Committee for 4 years, who has been a state senator for 8 years, and for all the time I've known you, you have been a champion for people with mental health, persistent serious mental health. This year, we were able to make some strides that we haven't done. So what do you feel good about? What do you feel like we have been able to accomplish finally?
Well, as you know, Betsy, we had a very fragile mental health system even before the pandemic.
Right.
And the pandemic just really laid it bare and exacerbated the situation. And so in this budget, we were able to come to a negotiated agreement with the Department of Health and Human Services, with people like you who represent providers in the community, with me and other legislators there who said, you know, we have to address this head on.
Yeah, so that was a big difference this year, I think. People finally got, like, that we can't ignore mental health. Like, it is, you know, important to our schools, to our jails, to our hospitals. They finally got that.
We were able to put together a package with your help of one-time money that would go directly to providers, especially providers who help the most acutely ailing folks, and again try to keep them home and stable enough not to need the hospital, and then also look at the rates that we're doing system-wide and adjust those rates starting next year. So it's sort of one time, a sort of a ramp to, you know, a more robust set of rates. So I'm hoping that, you know, this is going to help in the immediate term and in the long term. Mental illness is not insurmountable if you can find the right treatment, and sometimes it takes a while, but you know, you find the treatment, you get on with your life.
That's right.
Your job, your family, your relationships, whatever it is. And so that's what community mental health means to me.
The legislature was able to commit $40 million. Now, you know, we had $1 billion, right, left. So of course it's never enough, and of course there's still much more to do. But this was an incredible amount of money infused into the system, because if you know anyone or have a family member, and I'm sure you do, we all are touched by this. You know how difficult it is to get services. You know how hard it is. You know that people are languishing in emergency rooms. Young children languishing there for 3 and 4 days, 5 days, one child 5 weeks looking for a place to go because we don't have those community services. So this, again, it was so tricky to try and get folks to understand, A, that we could talk about mental health, because for years there's so much stigma, we haven't been able to do it, and then to say, yes, we can actually do something about it. So I don't know if anybody has anything. We'll get to talk to that in a minute. But I want to finish just these highlights with one of the things that I think is the most incredible change that I have seen in the legislature in the last 40 years. And that is our approach to substance use disorder and to assistance and recovery. And the Maine MRAP, the Maine Recovery Action Project, has been able to switch the entire lens that we see this issue. And one of the key pieces of that legislation was the Good Sam bill, which we'll talk about in a minute. But Brian, will you run that clip?
So Lydia, tell me a little bit about why you have gotten so involved and been such a powerful force in this fight.
Oh, well, thank you, Betsy, and thanks for taking the time to talk about this important issue. I am a clinical social worker, so I come from that professional experience, but more so, especially in the Good Samaritan expansion law that we're talking about today. I lost a family member to a drug overdose last fall, and I've talked a lot about what that's been like personally, but what I've really tried to put out there is that I'm not alone, that we are all, as a state, experiencing the grief of losing 636 Mainers last year, and it will be more this year unless we do something different. And so our policies haven't been working, and that's why we're here now trying to change them.
Well, and I think so one of the big things that you've been working on is the Good Samaritan law, so that when someone calls for help, if someone's there who has some other involvement with the law, right?
Yes.
That they don't get in trouble,
Right.
further trouble.
Yeah.
So it seems to me, like, I know we're still waiting on the governor's action, but it seems to me that there's been a seismic shift in the understanding of the legislature on both bodies.
Yeah.
Do you feel that too?
Absolutely. And one of the reasons I would say is because the recovery community is so strong, that it is a bipartisan group of residents in the state of Maine who have really come to us saying, we need help. We need your help as our representatives and senators. Please help us save our friends' lives, right? We are here because we were able to recover. We want our friends and neighbors and employees to find safe, healthy recovery too. And they can't do that if they're dead. And that message is so strong. And you see that in the testimony on the House floor, in the Senate. It is bipartisan support across both bodies. It's been amazing. And we see that in our press coverage. I mean, yeah, the substance use disorder epidemic doesn't target one group of people. It is across all sectors.
And I think there's an understanding, and I think you've been so important in saying what we're doing isn't working. Like so I think 2 years ago there's 300 folks who had died from overdoses. Now we're at 600, and as you said, we expect it to be more.
Yes, 2 Mainers a day dying of overdose.
Right.
And we see it at all levels that people are speaking up. Commissioner Liberty from the DOC recently said we have to stop trying to arrest our way out of addiction. And it is, we feel it in every part of our society. It's no longer a small group of people asking for help. It is all of us. And if you haven't been affected by it, act now so that it's not you. It's not your family member who dies.
Yeah, that's the most important.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for your work, and really this shift, whatever happens with that specific legislation, this shift will change everything.
It really is. I hope so. And I hope that we will keep fighting to save our friends and family members because they deserve to live.
That shift in how we deal with drugs and how we deal with substance use disorder, and I'm happy to say, I don't know if that it looks like that the recovery community has come to an agreement. The governor said she was going to veto this bill, and what the issue is with this bill is that when someone is experiencing an overdose, often people are reluctant to call because either they're on a bail, they're having a bail issue, or they are in trouble with the law somehow, and so they don't want to get in trouble, or they don't want to be tagged as someone involved with illegal substances. And so what happens is they don't call. And that's what Representative Crafts was saying, is that then people die. And she had a cousin who died. And just that way. And so this Good Sam bill basically gives immunity to people who are giving care and aid when the police come, that they're dealing with helping the person with the overdose and not trying to say, okay, which of these other people can we arrest now? And that is such a huge shift in how we deal, because we have had the war on drugs for a really long time. And it's really been a war against poor people and against people with substance use disorder. That has been the war that we have had. And so this and tribal sovereignty and mental health, and to a little bit lesser degree housing, were the shifts that we see. I don't know if you all remember when the pandemic started, but we all said we are not going to go back to normal. We want a new normal because the old normal isn't working for so many people. And I think these are some good news examples of again, fundamental shifts in thinking and approaches that we saw in this legislature. Now, some of this isn't finished and it's going to go to the governor's desk and we're not exactly sure what she's going to do with it. But we are hoping, and I know she is working hard not to veto things, and people are working hard. So there's a lot of negotiations going on these very things. But so it has been. So those are some of the things. And again, we at Maine Challenge have done full-length shows on each one of these topics. So if you want to know more about the background or what was being considered in the legislature, you can go to our YouTube channel on Maine Challenge and look up any of those shows and have a look. And if you are listening to this show on WERU, you can go to our Maine Challenge YouTube page and see the whole thing in video, but you can also listen to the rest of the story, which we are going to continue now. We thank you for joining us, those of you who are on WERU and are going to get off. But now I really want to open it up to those of you who are here. Any questions at all? A little ask me anything. Anything about the issues that we've talked about, or anything about the legislative session that you're wondering. If you want to raise your hand or just put a question in the chat, please let me know. And I'm happy to talk about anything, because it's been, I have to say, well, let me just say this one thing. What we talked about were some of the good news stories and some of the good news shifts. I have to say that as someone who is many people who were looking for really bold action, that in a time when we had the same party controlling all three bodies of the legislature, and we had $1 billion extra dollars. We had $1 billion extra dollars this year. Our whole budget is only $8 billion. So it was a huge amount of money. There is a little bit of disappointment on my part anyway, that we didn't do anything particularly creative or bold. 2 years of community college is pretty bold. That's good. But, it was, sort of fixing. We had a lot to fix. But there's also, we were having a conversation yesterday in the halls with some legislators about the last time we can remember some really bold action that either the legislature took or a governor took. And they're few and far between. So, okay, great. What are the challenges with Governor Mills, and what can we do to the governor to let LD 1626 become law? So, those are really good questions, and we're worried about her vetoing stuff. So I think that right now, I think the messages need to be many. So if you haven't called the governor about how you feel about this, it's really important to do so. I think that the biggest message on LD 1626, which is the tribal sovereignty bill, I think there are two. And I think one of the things that we hear, I've heard as one of the things she's concerned about, she's a lawyer, so she comes from that legal perspective, but one of the things that I've heard as a problem for her is that, to give up jurisdiction. And I think we have to say Maine is the only state in the nation that does not recognize the sovereignty of our tribes. And that has huge impact for them. It denies them access to federal funding, to federal programs. We can see what happens with the Indian courts, and they're not being allowed to prosecute people who are on their lands. So, and she knows that. But I think to have Maine be this sort of embarrassing outlier at a time when so that's one message, Karen. And I think the second message is, this is something that has swept the state of Maine. This is in every single town, community, and again, all over the state. This issue of sovereignty, I think people they understand that we have made our relationship with the tribes has been fraught with mistakes and fraught with disrespect and fraught with an inability of equality and kindness and and respect. And so I think people are ready to make a change. people are, I think the Maine community, the Maine people are ready to say, no, we want to change, we want to improve. Because again, it was in 2015 when our tribal representatives walked out of the State House and said, we're not going to participate in this. And so I think that's a very strong message. And Sylvia asked, what is her issue precisely, what she's stuck on? I think, I don't know. I can't speak for her, but I really do think it is this idea of having one person, that is the governor, her or somebody else, be in charge of all of Maine. That's the sort of the thing. And that somehow there's a fear somehow that we would lose, that the governor would lose control over these populations of people, which, I think most of the people in Maine would say, that's exactly right. That's why we need this bill. So anyway, so I think that's one of the issues. So I'm hoping, again, the you saw a little bit of the drumming, ceremony that was held before, but that's the other thing. There has been 3 huge rallies at the State House in support of this during COVID, right? So at a time when it's hard for people to get together. Yeah, that's a good point, Karen. So Karen says there's, besides her training as a lawyer, women can be different kinds of leaders. And if she's not an originalist with the Constitution, why be one with the Settlement Act? And, a lot of stuff was uncovered. If you haven't had a chance, you should go look up Jeff Evangelos's testimony on the floor about this bill. Because if you go back to 1980, when the original Land Claims Act was passed, there was a lot of information about how this was a way to really prevent sovereignty, to prevent the Native Americans in the state and the tribes in the Wabanaki Alliance in the state from gaining power. And that they were, and they made them municipalities, and they gave the whole excuses that was to help with school funding. Well, that was a red herring. So anyway, yeah. And I think that I wonder, Karen, I'd love to know what people's thoughts are. And again, feel free to unmute yourself and chat. You don't have to all be in the writing if you want. But when I'm feeling really hopeful, I'm feeling like maybe we are getting ready for a different kind of leadership and a style of leadership where we actually collaborate, where this sort of negative, rancor and fighting against each other is really, people are tired of it. People are tired of it, even legislators. And I think this was really interesting in this session, that this last budget that they just did, there was a lot of talk about, it was a 2/3 budget, so only 2 people in the Senate voted against it and a handful in the House. And it was, people kept saying, oh gosh, the minority party, the Republicans, can't find anything to oppose in this budget, right? And so on one hand, I'm like, oh, that's a problem, right? That means we're not doing enough. But on the other hand, it made it really hard for them to sort of stake their ground, because politics has become a time when we actually have, where we are doing that, where it's become like staking out positions instead of leading and getting to yes.